So first, we'll have an introduction to the European Data Space for Smart Communities project. If you haven't heard about it yet, you will hear about it in a minute. And then we will delve into the scope of the work and impact. So you will know what to expect, what do we expect from the pilots, and you'll hear a bit about our proposal for an impact assessment framework. Then we will move to the call for pilots itself. So then you will be able to ask your questions about the round 3 for the call for pilots, and hear some tips and reflections since we've already gone through 2 rounds. And yeah, you will have time for questions during all these presentations from our colleagues. So yeah, without further ado, I will then give the floor to Sophie.
Thank you very much, Genevieva, and thank you for hosting and organizing this very good-looking information session. So on behalf of OASC and my colleague, actually, Elizabeth Knudsen, who couldn't make it today for she had a personal emergency, I will introduce the project. OASC, Open Agenda Smart Cities, is acting as the coordinator of this project, and together with our colleagues, we are working towards achieving the objectives here. So let's start from the beginning. Why are we even talking about data spaces? So for those of you who have not necessarily been following the European policy journey of the last 5 to 10 years, in 2020, the European Union introduced the European Strategy for Data, and this included finding or identifying and launching new ways of working with data to make Europe's global competitiveness and data sovereignty happen. And the instrument for this that was identified is the introduction of a data space, of data spaces across sectors, between sectors, and this is because data spaces offer the promise of data sharing in a trustworthy and a secure manner. So what it means that you would come together with different stakeholders and exchange your data without losing sight of it. It promises that we can actually have a data flow across Europe, across different sectors. So we are looking at, for example, mobility sector, weather sector, and this can exchange data, and that also that this data would be then high quality. And by making all of this data available for innovations, we can actually manage to create such environments for data sets that are actually respecting European legislations, norms, values, and laws. And this would then also translate into the use of that data being respectful towards European norms. And what is then the European data space for smart communities? This is a cross-sectorial initiative. This actually translates in reality. These are projects that are funded by the European, the Digital Europe program to create a blueprint for creating data spaces for smart communities. So it means that we are supposed to have use cases that are cross-sectorial. Again, to have, for example, data sets from different sectors, whether air, or transport or mobility or whatnot, and to combine those for the purpose of a service, a solution, but something with a value. So that's to have an objective in mind for why we are actually needing to leverage on different data sets. So this actually happened. The way we are working is that we had a preparatory action where together with the partners, we did a lot of research into defining how this data space should look like. What are the mechanisms that should be in place? What are technical and non-technical elements for this data sharing environment? And then we move towards the actual deployment phase, which is happening right now, where we are co-funding 10 to 12 pilots. Sorry, I changed the screen. So where we are co-funding cross-sectoral data spaces for smart communities, and these data spaces will then be federated into a European data space. So the idea is that while there are local or regional data spaces, these can all come together on a European scale, and this should actually advance the implementation. It supports the policy priorities of the cities and communities within the EU. So the idea is that when there is a community or an environment that's already looking to leverage on its data to create a solution, we would like to help there. And this actual deployment is also serves, while also supporting the localities, it also serves to validate the governance and technical blueprint of the preparatory action. So in reality, we are looking to fund 10 to 12 pilots. This means that we are looking for real life use cases that are willing to use or looking to use data spaces. We are targeting local and regional public administrations in the EU and their partners. So what it means that we are organizing open calls. We have had 3 open rounds of calls for becoming a use case. We are looking at, we are calling at local and public administrations who are working together with partners that can be private sector, that can be academia, can be startups, civil society, to actually make a data space happen for a certain solution or service. What we offer is that in total we have 15.3 million euros to distribute across these pilots. This translates to up to 1.5 million a pilot. But it is a co-funding mechanism, so it means that if you ask for 1.5 million, you also have to come up with 1.5 million on behalf of your consortia to realize that data space. We are also part of the European ecosystem, so the pilots that we are working with will on the one hand be part of the European data space, they will also be part of a bigger European landscape, which translates to the local digital twins initiatives, the Sitcom AI, which is an AI and robotics testing and experimentation facility, or the recently launched European Digital Infrastructure Consortium, the EDIC. These are all European initiatives that are in place to help the roadmap for Europe's digital transformation.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Nuria de Lama. I'm Consulting Director at IDC, which is one of the partners in the consortium. We are leading the business and the sustainability part of the data space, and therefore I will bring some aspects related precisely to the impact of the project. So I'm using this picture that Sophie has already explained, but my main goal here is to tell you that you may have seen, if you have checked the terms of reference of the open call, that basically we are asking all the proposers to have already a baseline, so some data platforms, a digital twin, or some infrastructure that you will already be working on. And the idea is, of course, that you will link some of these data infrastructures in order to generate the data spaces. We are also asking you to come with another city. So this means that in principle, we expect a degree of interoperability between the 2 pilots that you will propose in your proposal, or more as you need it. But I think that what Sophie mentioned before is very, very important, because there is a wider ecosystem that you need to consider not only during the execution, but also when you prepare your proposal. The first thing is that I can understand that probably in your cities, you have already defined your strategic plan for the usage of artificial intelligence. You may already be developing some of these algorithms, or you may have already deployed a digital twin. All these kind of infrastructures and initiatives require access to a lot of data. So what we wouldn't like is that you make a proposal where you are really focusing on executing very isolated pilots using just a kind of more advanced data platform that you already have. I think it's very important that whatever you propose links already with your strategic initiatives and is already taking advantage of some of the investment and infrastructure that you are already somehow deploying in your city, or maybe investments that you are planning to do at European level. So for example, if you are already part of the Cityverse initiative. And something that is also quite important is that normally what we've seen in the proposal so far is that people propose pilots with use cases that are focused on a very narrow-minded application, which is fine for the purpose of this particular project. But think that the purpose of adapting your infrastructures to a very interoperable system with other data spaces means that you will be able to share and exchange data not only with the partners in your ecosystem, but also in the future with other data spaces. So please think also in the long term and about how your data space will federate with other data spaces coming from other cities, and how you will federate with other data spaces that will allow you to get access to data that you may not need to have in your own data space, like, for example, data related to weather, climate to infrastructure in other cities, maybe to things related to energy or mobility. So some of this data may be accessible through your cooperation with other data spaces. So just take into consideration this wider picture. So what are we looking for? We are looking for two use cases, at least, that are related somehow to Green Deal domains. And this is quite wide, I would say. Here you have some examples. Use cases could come about predictive traffic management, sustainable mobility planning, data-related services, for example, about weather, about climate, about your planning for adapting to climate change. For example, things related to energy flows in your city, zero pollution actions that have to do maybe with management of water, soil, pollution, and also things that have to do with urban design, building management, and other kind of public services. These are just examples, but basically there should be two different use cases that have to do somehow with the Green Deal policies. And you should be able to demonstrate the applicability of the blueprint, since one of the purposes of the projects is precisely to validate the blueprint, and also the feasibility to federate with other data spaces on a European level. This is a very important aspect, and that's why I introduced this wider picture before. If you want more inspiration, you can use the links that are proposed in this slide, where you can find additional use cases to understand what the value of the data space could be for your cities. So let me go now to a framework that we have created in the context of the project to assess the impact. And why is this important? Because we are not only talking about technology. Of course, you will need to show the feasibility and that the technology is working from an operational point of view. But as important as that is the fact that what you are building will be sustainable in time and will have a business model that will allow you not only maybe to get money, but at least to ensure that you get benefits and the investment is worthwhile. For this, we have created this impact assessment framework. And if your project is selected, you will get also a training on this framework so that you know how to use it. And basically, we have defined 5 layers for the impact assessment framework. One is the context, because of course, the impact that you will get is very much related to the context you may have in your cities. What are the inputs that you are putting into the data space? That includes, for example, which are the data sets, the quality of the data sets that you are inserting in the data space. What is the funding or the amount of investment that you are putting there in terms of resources, either human resources, but also money, the technology capabilities. And this is also one of the aspects that you will need to include in the proposal, which skills, which standards you are aware of, and additional sources that, of course, will impact the data space. And based on this input and the context, one of the things that we will ask all pilots to do during the execution is to provide measurements of specific outputs. Outputs are the direct result of using the data space. And here you can see that we will measure both performance and also the effects of using the data space in the very short term. Some of these aspects relate to trust and transparency, the availability of data that you will be able to make, and also how usable this data is by different communities, how you are able to increase your user experience, to engage your ecosystem, how smart you are becoming thanks to the usage of these data sources, and also the financial sustainability. Of course, if we think about the medium or long-term impact, you may get also potential measurements for the outcomes, which are more or less on the medium term, and the long-term impacts. You will also be provided with some guidelines on how to identify these outcomes and impact. But I would like to focus specifically on the outputs today, because this is something that you should consider already when writing your proposal. Here you have the definitions of some of these categories of outputs that I've mentioned, but what it is more important and can inspire you is precisely the examples of some of these indicators that we will use to measure each of the categories mentioned here. So in terms of trust and transparency, for example, you will be able or you will be asked to measure, for example, how many issues about ethics you have solved thanks to the use of the data space, how ready you are with respect to the ethics compliance, the number of open standards that you are using, because this measures somehow the degree of interoperability with other data spaces. Also, if you are able, thanks to the data space, to get a higher score in LORDIMAS. You know that in the proposal, you already need to provide a figure about your LORDIMAS measurement at this stage. So the idea is that once you have the data space deployed, you will really increase your score there. How many data sets are available? Maybe you have already data prepared in your city, but not this data is usable for AI algorithms. So all this will help you to make more data available in a better format. For example, how many memes you have implemented thanks also to your presence in the data space. Other aspects to be measured relate to user experience or ecosystem engagement. Let me stop here because just to provide you with some additional information based on other proposals that we have received, we see that projects focus very much on identifying the few data providers they need just to execute a use case. And my recommendation for you would be that beyond considering that besides considering the data providers and data users you will need specifically in your use cases, think also about what kind of ecosystem you would like to get out of the data space with multiple data providers, multiple data users, and thinking also about the federation with other data spaces, because this will allow you to create an ecosystem that can make the data space viable from a financial point of view in the future. So don't think only about the pure implementation during the project, think also beyond that. And then here you have some additional indicators about how smart you can be. And this has to do with the number of reusable services that you will be able to implement, number of AI-enabled services available. Usage of AI is not mandatory, but I would say that thanks to the big amount of data that you may be able to create or to access thanks to the data space, I think it's a very good opportunity already to get engaged in some AI algorithms that can be useful for some services in your cities, and also the number of additional applications that you will develop as a result of the data space. And finally, this financial sustainability is very important. In the proposal, we are asking you to provide information about the business models that you will be using. And please think also about how you plan to generate revenue, or at least how you plan to cover the cost. And the final aspect to be mentioned here is that, of course, we expect you to think about specific indicators that will measure how efficient or how impactful is the data space in the execution of your pilot as such. So this has to do, for example, with the kind of application or use case that you are deploying. If it is about water management, you will have specific indicators about that. If it is about energy flows, of course, the indicators will be different. So please think about the general indicators that I've mentioned so far, and then those ones that will be really specific to the domain of your use cases. So all this to give you some ideas of things that you will need to measure during the project, where we expect you to make an impact thanks to the data space, and that you should already have an idea when you write the proposal. And this is my last slide. So basically trying to highlight some of these messages. Please think that the value should come or should apply to all the stakeholders and roles involved in the data space. So it's not only the city, but also the different stakeholders that work with you. There should be a value for any kind of data provider or data user that engages with the data space. Think about that. So this means that you should think about the impact and the economic feasibility of the use cases deployed in your pilots, potential use cases that you may facilitate thanks to the data space in the future but are not part of your project, and for sure the business model of the data space infrastructure as such. So think about the cost and about the incomes. And some dimensions to consider. You will be provided with tools like the Data Cooperation Canvas to think about the business elements, but think also about the financials. As I mentioned before, what could be the cost infrastructure? What could be the human resources that are needed to keep the data space active and operational in the future? What is your responsibility, and what could be maybe adopted by another company or another provider, or what kind of savings you will get out of the federation with other data spaces? And finally, as I mentioned at the very beginning, think about the synergies with your AI plans and other initiatives, because of course, to make this sustainable in time, it needs to be really related to some other investments you are doing in the city. I think that with this, I finish my presentation and I'm open to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nuria. Are there any questions about this presentation?
Maybe this is something that I can actually refer to in the following part in terms of the reflections from the previous rounds. Yes. Right. And there's some couple of questions in the chat in terms of the MIMS. I will cover that also in terms of the technical part coming up in a moment. And the last one here, offering our organization to be a use case in a project. In the end, the scope of work, as Nuria explained, is to deliver new data services based on data sharing across two domains. So if your organization is working in that field and can also start working, let's say, leveraging the existing work to build up new use cases, then this is completely fine.
But maybe as there might be some new questions coming up, then feel free to use the chat, and Nuria will be here to also help still respond to those in terms of the scope of work and impact. I will continue here. And hello everyone with whom we haven't had the chance to meet yet. My name is Silla Sepp. I serve as the head of urban data ecosystems at the Finnish Center for Smart Cities here in Tallinn, Estonia. And my job here is to maybe talk through the administrative parts of the call for pilots and give you the details on how to make sure that the applications fit with the conditions set for this call. This is, as Sophie mentioned, the third and last round of call for pilots in the frames of the deployment of European data space for smart communities. And I can already say right away that the conditions for the third round hasn't changed from the previous rounds. So everybody who has already been part of the previous info sessions, do bear with me as I go through some of the conditions for those who are maybe here for the first time and want to learn about the conditions. This said, I will be a bit quicker as our time is short. And for those who are here for the first time, you have available the Call for Pilots manual, which describes all of the details that we'll also speak today, as well as the recordings from the previous info sessions. Then you can get a little bit of more elaboration on those parts from also those recordings. For the third round, it's launched already at the end of the year on 1st of December and will be open until the end of February this year. So still 1.5 months time to prepare your consortium and application. All right, so I won't go over the scope of work as Nuria has already done that. It's really important that you consider really what are the use cases and new data services that you are planning to develop in the course of this project, as well as also understanding that this is part of the wider initiative to really deploy the data space. But it has several preconditions also from the legal, financial, technical, business, organizational, and ethical sides, which again are all described in more detail in the Call for Pilots manual. I'll go through very quickly on the few parts. Sorry. So in terms of the legal aspects, the consortium needs to include cross-border and cross-sectorial, or would be nice to have a cross-border and cross-sectorial consortium. There needs to be at least 2 local administrations or regional administrations from 2 different member states in the European Union, or also then the Digital Europe associated countries. Do note, though, that because the call was set up in 2022, only those associated countries that were already part of the program at that time are eligible in this particular call. All partners need to share their letter of commitment, especially the local administrations, but also all partners who are bringing in the co-financing for the project that we will also speak in a moment. And the call is targeted towards local administrations, but of course they can bring into the project their partners from the private sector, academia, and civil society, etc. So there is no other conditions in that regard. Do note that this is a restricted call, so all project consortium members need to be also not controlled by a country that is not an eligible country, and you need to submit ownership control declarations also once selected and contracts are being signed. Moving on then to the financial part, the pilots can receive maximum 1.5 million euros to support the implementation. There is a limit of 1 million per organization throughout the 3 rounds of calls. So it is possible that you could actually participate in several calls, but the limit of 1 million will also then go over these 3 calls. There is then also the request to bring in at least 50% of co-financing. And while this is, of course, challenging, there is also a strategic note to that. It's important that those developments here in the course of deploying the data space are not simply a research or, let's say, innovation action that will have a start and an end, and then we'll see what happens. It's really important that there is a commitment also from those local administrations to continue with those activities in the long run. And one of the activities or signs of that is to commit also some investment into deploying those pilots. The co-financing has to be a dedicated cost. There needs to be available documentation so that it can be also audited afterwards, and it cannot include, or it's double funding and in-kind contribution really is not allowed. So that will be also checked in the course of legal and financial scrutiny before the contracts are signed. But as this is a bit challenging part as a result of also what we see throughout the 3 rounds of calls, then I want to stop here a little bit more on how to also find that co-financing. Of course, one of the easiest, in a way, the simplest way, not maybe the easiest, is to invest with own resources to that. But it can be also, of course, challenging to many organizations. So in addition to those own investments, there are also opportunities to look at what are the conditions, for example, or opportunities from the member states. So in that regard, I want to encourage you to check also the possibilities from Digital Europe program, possibilities in your own countries. We provide here the link to the contact details of the national contact points from all of the member states. In addition to that, there's also the recovery and resilience facilities available, which might have dedicated funds for deploying data spaces. And this is not only as a very, let's say, wishful thinking that there might be. We also see that there are real commitments from some of the member states to support these actions. So, for example, as an experience from deploying or submitting a application to the Green Deal deployment project, the consortium partners got some additional funding through Danish and Dutch programs. In addition, for example, also the Slovenian government has provided some resources a little bit later, of course, so there is some conditions involved, but nevertheless, there is resources available to also co-finance such actions. So this is, in short, an encouragement for you to get in contact with local and national service providers or contacts from your countries to really discuss the details on how might they be able to help you in co-financing this effort. If you'd like to learn more about the experiences, for example, from the Green Deal deployment project, we have a colleague here who is able to respond to that. So please also share your questions in the chat for that. I'll continue here now with the technical conditions, and I'll start from the perspective that, of course, the first one is that there needs to be cross-sectorial. It needs to be a cross-sectorial data space. There needs to be a sufficient level of digitalization, so either a data platform, a digital twin, or an emerging data space already in place in that local area. And now answering also to the question that came through the chat, the pilot itself needs to at least become compliant with MIM 1, MIM 2, and MIM 6. So if there is, if it's not yet compliant by the beginning of when it's submitting the application and the pilot would be selected and starting, then at least you need to also show what are the actions that you plan in order to become compliant and also to in what timeline this will be possible. And this is not only a checkpoint thing. We've set up this requirement because this is important pillar to actually be able to interoperate and federate later on with other data space initiatives. So this cannot stay open until the very end of the pilot, because then the pilot project period will be over and there's no time to work on that interoperability part anymore. So it needs to happen throughout the project and more in the earlier stages. Lastly, there's the aspects of mapping the data space's building blocks, the standards and implementations. All of that is available to you in the blueprint, and finally also the required components. So I'll go over right now just to mention that the components most necessary to map out, of course, for the federation perspective is the authorization policy store, universal trust data registry, and description of digital service and data offers in the federated catalog. You find more details on this again in the blueprint, but do remember that those are important also to show within the application. Then there's the business and organization side. I won't stop here too long because Nuria has described very well what is the intended expectation for the pilots also from a business perspective. It's important that you elaborate on that also in the application in order to show how do you plan for sustainability, scaling the services beyond the scope of this particular use case. And this is, of course, then showing the quality there for impact and relevance also in the long run. Finally, there is the aspects of ethical. As part of the application package, you need to submit also the ethics and data protection self-assessment to show that you've considered ethical aspects of your project. It's related also to the implementation plan that you will need to describe in the application, because if there are some of the ethical concerns or challenges that needs to be, let's say, considered and addressed, then we will also look for relevant activities in your implementation plan to understand how are you actually dealing with those. So do take that self-assessment quite seriously, and also take this as a helpful tool, because with this type of tool you can really try identify and also help plan your activities around how to address those issues. So next I will go through all of the different kind of details within the application package and also the timeline and the process. But before I go there, is there any questions about the conditions for this call? I see that there's been a lot of chat going on in the chat, but maybe Genoveva, you can help me identify most pressing ones at this moment.
Yes. We were replying to the different questions. I think the most pressing one right now is the in-kind contributions. A question, what is it considered in-kind or not? And there was this last comment regarding if the permanent staff could be eligible for the co-funding. Or if it's considered in-kind.
In that regard, it is indeed that in-kind contribution that is not really directed to the implementation is not allowed. They said, for example, the permanent staff that has been it has been a frequent question. We consider this that there needs to be a separate allocation of that effort into that project, and then you can show that this is an investment from the organization side into actually deploying or implementing that pilot. So hopefully this will answer also your question.
And then there was a question regarding if the co-funded budget will be audited.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, will the co-funded budget audited?
So indeed, so the project itself needs to have an audit afterwards to look through the costs and how those have been gathered and how they have been also financed. So this would this total budget will be the subject for the audit.
Right. So I think we can continue, Silly.
Yes, I guess there will be several questions regarding that. So I'll try to also look through the chat afterwards. And as a note, there is already a lot of information available from similar questions in the frequently asked questions page. And all of those questions that have been raised here in the chat will also go into the frequently asked questions page afterwards. So if we don't answer here right away in the chat, then we'll make sure that you'll get an answer later on through the website. All right, so moving on then to the application process and timeline. Firstly, I'd like to cover the point about what will be actually submitted. Firstly, there will be the application form that covers basically all of the different sections for understanding the scope of work and how you plan to implement it, as well as the impact intended. Then the pilot budget, including the resource plan in an Excel format, the letters of commitment from all local administrations and all partners that will bring in the co-financing, and finally the ethics and data protection self-assessment. And you need to submit that to the email address apply@ds4sscc.eu by the deadline, which is then the 28th of February. In terms of the application form, there's the 5 different sections, the pilot details, basically understanding that what is the who are the partners, what is the duration, what are the funding requested, all of that, and also mostly the concrete aspects for eligibility that we will check immediately after receiving the applications. Then the relevance part to show how do you actually intend to fit within the larger scope of work from the Digital Europe program with other initiatives that have been already described earlier in this info session. The implementation plan, and there it's really important also to include the budget details as a basically summary from the budget template. The impact covering the direct and indirect impact and sustainability plans, and then finally declarations in terms of commitment, the ownership control, etc. Here I'd like to just give you a few reflections and tips also as an experience from the previous rounds for call for pilots. In terms of the digital maturity, you don't need to include necessarily the Lordimer score, but you need to confirm whether you have at least data platform, digital twin, or an emerging data space initiative already within the local, in the pilot sites. So please take that, look into this particular question so that you've answered that correctly. In terms of the value propositions, again, this is just important that often digitalization developments and quite technical developments will also be described mostly from a technical perspective. But in this particular call, we look very much also to understand what is your business case and how do you intend to grow that beyond that pilot project. Finally, there's, as mentioned, important to include the budget summaries into the application form, and also indicating the co-financing sum per partner if they're bringing in this. And what is important is that you also stick to the character limits. These are there not only as a soft, let's say, reminder. We do truly also look through and calculate the character limits of your answers, and if they go over that, we need to exclude that from evaluation. So it would be just a pity to miss out on important information from evaluation if you haven't looked out for this. You can include images, but there are some requirements for this. So each image will account for 25% of that character limit within this particular answer, and they cannot exceed one half of an A4 page. All of those instructions again are in the template cover page, so you'll also have that reminders there. Moving on then to the pilot budget, it has the personal cost part, the subcontracting part, cost, purchase costs and indirect costs. And yeah, it's quite straightforward. Maybe one of the things that have been asked through the support platform is confirmation on the percentage of the indirect costs, which is a bit different from, for example, Horizon Europe projects. So here in this project, it's 7%. So please account for that. And very important is to include the daily rate and allocated person months within the budget template. Please use the cost description row in order to indicate that. So again, we will check for that. Important is also that in the budget template, we assume that mostly the consortium will bring in 50% of the co-financing, which is the limit. So hence the grant requested cell includes that formula for 50%. If you decide to bring in more co-financing, then you have the chance to edit the template, then also correct the formula regarding that. So just a reminder regarding that part. So moving on then to the letters of commitment, as mentioned already, they need to be submitted by all local administrations and partners who bring in the co-financing. It needs to have the letterhead of the organization. It needs to have the signature of the relevant person, and also do take into account that those who have been participating in the previous rounds but are resubmitting their applications, new letters of commitments are needed because they address a different call than previously. So please take that into account. And I think I don't need to go through too much on the ethics and data protection self-assessment. Again, this is just to show that let's say emphasize that this should be kind of seen as a helpful tool for yourself to really identify issues regarding the data sets that you might include, the ways how you also intend to deliver the services, etc., and also then address those challenges within your implementation plan. So in terms of the process itself, as already mentioned, the deadline for this is on the 28th of February, at the end of the day, Central European time. And as soon as we receive the applications, we start with the evaluation process, which normally will last up to 1 month. At first, we will do the eligibility check to check for all requirements in terms of the legal, financial, technical, ethical sides and business organizational, and after that it goes to the evaluation by experts. The experts will have a consensus group meeting, so the decisions or evaluations are provided on a consensus basis, and then finally there will be the final ranking and selection by the project. Here is to show that the website as well as the call for pilots manual includes a ethical or eligibility check read, and we encourage you to check through this against the application that you submit, because if the application isn't eligible, then unfortunately we cannot also pass it over to the evaluation by the experts. So do take that again quite seriously. Also providing what information is listed so that you actually submit all information in time, respect the character limits, etc. The expert evaluation, quite quickly, I want to mention that each committee includes 3 experts, and each committee has 1 external evaluator and 1 internal evaluator from the project side. The last evaluator then is added based on what expertise is actually needed to understand the application best. And it has 3 main criteria for evaluation: relevance, implementation, and impact. And each category needs to receive at least 3 points in order to pass the evaluation. In total, there needs to be at least 10 points received. And you'll see that there is a match between also the application form and the evaluation criteria. So it's you can show in those parts really to how do you want the evaluators to understand how relevant this application is, how do you intend to implement it, and also what's your intended impact regarding that. Final ranking, though, I want to emphasize also this part that this is not a mathematical exercise. So we don't take only the total scores from the evaluators, but also take into some other considerations, because in the end, the pilots are there to reach the objectives of the European data space for smart communities. And so firstly, we'll look through that if there's the total scores are even among applications, we'll first prioritize those who received most or like look through the criterion for relevance. And if those are even, then we'll look through impact, because in the end, it's important that those pilots are actually, well, good quality in terms of also the scope of work that they plan to deliver. This said, the evaluation team who will do the final ranking has the right to also adjust the total scores again, and taking into consideration the objectives of the project and also some other principles. For example, we have the 5 different Green Deal domains mentioned as those where we expect to receive applications. We want to also see diversity of domains included among the 10 to 12 pilots that will be selected in this course of the 3 rounds. So I can already share with you that we have received in general a lot of, for example, applications who include the domain for mobility. This is something that is quite expected as a very popular domain in the field of smart cities and smart communities. But this is something also that, of course, we need to take into account as a principle for final ranking. Similarly, geographies, maturity of the suggested solutions, etc. And finally, the steering committee of the project will take the recommendation from the final ranking side and make the final decision on whom to award. So very quickly about the timeline again, as soon as the evaluation is over at the end of March, we'll send out the notifications for all applicants. After that, there is a month who go through financial and legal scrutiny, check that all documents are correct, that we've received the ownership control declarations and check through those. And of course, if there's anything to negotiate in terms of the project, then that needs to also fit within this month. The implementation period should start on the 1st of May, and I want to emphasize here that please don't count for delays because you have only 16 months to go through the implementation period, and this project of the deployment for data space for smart communities will also end at some point. So it's very important that we can go through and sign the contracts and start the implementation in time. I didn't mention this beforehand, but I have communicated this separately that in this 3rd round, we expect to select at least 4 applications, but this will be adjusted, of course, also depending on the results from the round 2, which is still open. So throughout this month, we will also understand better how many pilots will be selected in the round 2. As soon as the implementation starts, you'll also start to receive a lot of support services from the project. So you're not alone in implementing that and asking you to federate without any guidance. So from this project, will be assigned different mentors, you have the possibility to receive support from different domain experts, also get some trainings. So please also account some time for this to participate and use those support services. We've provided a calculation of an estimation of how much time this would take in the Call for Pilots manual, so to look through this also there. And here I'd like to just go over finally the next steps for you before we close. Do get acquainted with all of the materials and through the funding and tenders portal as well as the website. Look through also the priority areas and objectives for the Green Deal and New European Bauhaus initiative, because those are also the guiding initiatives for this project. Here I'd like to just show that where can you find, there's a list of different documents available on the website, which you can then open from the plus sign and you'll get access to the list of documents. You have the blueprint, which has several parts, so please take a look at all of them, not only the technical parts, but also the governance and governance perspective to the blueprint. And finally, as mentioned, there's quite a good number of questions and answers already in the frequently asked questions page. If you don't find an answer there, you have the support email to reach out to us, and we'll try to answer to you as quickly as possible. And here, Genoveva already mentioned earlier that we'll have a lot of, or have been already receiving some, let's say, harvesting some reflections from the previous rounds. We've just published a blog post this week to summarize some of them. So do take a look also to that. So
sorry, Silly. So we only have 2 minutes left. Maybe we can take those 2 minutes for questions. And since we will share these materials with attendees, we can maybe take the time for them to take the floor if there are any questions. There were some questions in the chat. Does the project duration of maximum 16 months include the time for the audit? What is the deadline for providing the audit certificate?
If I remember correctly, I need to check the manual. It should state there, but normally it would be, I think, a month to go through this. So as soon as the project is implemented, of course, there's also the reporting phase, and as part of that, there should be also an audit then for the matters in this project.
There is also a question about the minimum viable products that would need to be in place from Sabine. So they say that they have already a digital infrastructure, so they have their own urban data platform consisting of open source components. So does it need to be technically compatible with regards to the with the third call specifics?
In terms of the MVP of when starting the implementation, or MVP in terms of the scope of work by the end of the pilot? I didn't get that part from the question. So we haven't defined very concrete specifications for, like, let's say, what is needed to start this implementation. So there can be also different scope for the data platform in place or the digital twin in place. I would pose this question back to you, basically understanding that what would you need in order to actually be able to set up a data space and also to be able to federate with other data space initiatives. So if you find that this level of that you have already now and plus 16 months of development is sufficient to get to this part, then this is already mature enough. If you're also questioning about your own, let's say, digital maturity, I recommend to go through the Lordemas tool. This is it's not a requirement from our side, but it helps you to identify in what level you are already. And there's no concrete threshold for this. What I mentioned also in terms of the final ranking is that we'll take into account and understand that each context might be different, and to also understand lower maturity solutions, with the understanding that there is also relevant ambition to develop a data space from that.
Thank you, Sile, and thank you everyone for participating today and asking so many questions. We see that there's a lot of interest in our project, so that makes us very happy. And we would like to close with a call to action. You have here, you can see the screen, the different means to follow us on social media and to ask your questions on the call for pilots at support@ds4sc.eu. You can follow us on LinkedIn, on Mastodon, not anymore on Twitter. We have stepped out as many other organizations. And we would send you the slides and recording very shortly, and also including all the links, especially the most interesting links like the FAQ questions, where you can also find very detailed answers to the questions that you posted today on the chat and many others that for sure you will have or you will encounter when reading all the materials. But we remain available at the email addresses that you see on the screen for any questions. So thank you so much for your participation, and best of luck preparing your applications.